On behalf of the Canadian Club of Ottawa and its Board of Directors, I'm happy to welcome you to today's session about future skills in the Canadian labour market. I'm Sarah Watts-Reinert, CEO at Polytechnics Canada and a Director at the Canadian Club of Ottawa, and I'm happy to be here today in both of those capacities. While we're meeting on a virtual platform, I would like to acknowledge the rights of the Indigenous peoples to the land each of us is on. For the Canadian Club of Ottawa, it's the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. Anishinaabe are the original inhabitants of the territory where the Parliament buildings overlook the Ottawa River, which is just downstream from one of the most sacred sites for Indigenous peoples, Miigwech. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. If your internet quality is poor, use the click here to switch stream button to watch at a lower bandwidth. The video quality will diminish, but the audio will remain the same. If you're having other technical issues, click on the Request Help button at the bottom right-hand corner of the webcast page. A response will be emailed to the address you used to register. To ask a question, click on the Questions tab, type in your question, and click Submit. You may ask a question at any time during the webcast, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can during today's session. I'm also happy to be here as the sponsor for today's conversation. As the economy returns to something resembling its pre-pandemic normal, employers are once again reporting difficulty finding people with the skills they need for their businesses. With an approach to skills development that is truly industry responsive, polytechnic institutions across Canada work closely with their partners to understand skills in demand and prepare graduates to fill those gaps. They offer hands-on, experiential education and training that positions people for success in the labour market. But the pandemic has highlighted the need for another area where polytechnics excel, in the area of upskilling and reskilling the mid-career workforce. As the pace of change in Canada's workplaces accelerates, Canadians must become lifelong learners. It's obvious to me that polytechnic institutions have an important role to play when it comes to professional development, continuing education, and contract training for their business partners as well. To moderate today's discussion, I'm happy to turn things over to someone who needs no introduction. The Honourable Perrin Beatty is currently President and CEO at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, a role he assumed after a long and distinguished career in federal politics and following similar leadership positions at both Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters and the CBC. As the spokesman for more than 200,000 businesses of all shapes and sizes in every sector and every region of Canada, I can't think of anyone better to moderate a discussion about the intersection of skill shortages being faced by business and the post-secondary education providers working to address them. Over to you, Perrin.
Sarah, thanks very much. What a kind introduction. And let me say as well, what a great partner Polytechnics Canada is. It really is a pleasure to work with you. Well, welcome to everybody. It is a pleasure to be here today. I wish we could do it in person, but one of the good things about doing it virtually is that we are literally able to bring together people from different regions of Canada to be able to participate. We're all aware of the labor shortage crisis in our country. For context, it should be noted that there were over 830,000 job vacancies in January of 2022. Which means that 1 in every 20 positions remains unfilled. Vacancies in healthcare, construction, manufacturing, accommodation and food services, along with retail trade are leading the way. But we have shortages across sectors, across communities and regions that are affecting every single size of business. Businesses, including small businesses, are citing labor shortages as one of their, and often their most significant, barriers to economic growth. If Canadian businesses can't find the talent that they need to sustain or grow their operations, our economy risks stagnation at a time when growth is a necessity. Now, as we head into recovery, the focus should not be on the ebbs and flows of the labor market through COVID-19, but instead with the fact that we're in exactly the same position as before the pandemic started. A structural deficit in our labor market with no singular or easy fix. Now, one important part of the labor force puzzle is building sustainable talent pipelines through education and training, and also through upskilling and reskilling throughout Canadians' professional careers. Polytechnics have a critical role to play. I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion with our educational panelists and with their business sector partners. I'll introduce them just very briefly by their titles and then lead a moderated discussion, but we want to invite you as well to submit your questions to the panel. So for today's session, I'm very pleased to welcome Claude Brulé, who's the president and CEO of Algonquin College, who's actually coming to us today from Halifax. Steve Barkhouse is the president owner of Amstead Design and Build. Laura Jo Gunter, who's the president and CEO of the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, and NAIT is a remarkable institution. And Dan Giorescu, who's the co-founder and CEO of Credivera. Well, colleagues, thank you for joining us on the panel. Perhaps I could put my first question to our business representatives. We've all been through an incredible challenge with the pandemic, and it's not over yet. How has the pandemic, and how's the pace of change that we're undergoing at the present time affected your sector or your particular business in terms of the skills that are required to stay relevant and competitive? And are there some new areas, for example, where you need help that simply weren't on your radar prior to the pandemic? Who'd like to go first?
I can jump in there. So I represent the construction industry. We're a small construction company here in Ottawa, and certainly Mr. B summed up the challenges that we suffer quite well, but it's a new way of doing business, we find, since the pandemic. We were an essential service throughout the pandemic, so obviously we had to get people into their homes and people didn't have roofs. So we worked throughout the pandemic, which brought a significant amount of stress to our team. And like the healthcare industry and many other industries, actually, we lost people out of our industry because of that challenge and those stresses. Supplies are hard to get, it's all over the news. Prices are going through the roof. And it's just a much greater challenge to perform the duties that we had done pre-pandemic and get the same results now, which really demands a higher level of communication and professionalism than ever before. The opportunity in our industry is that we're red hot right now. Our market's red hot, and we started out with a skilled labor shortage, and it has become severe. So we are unable to achieve those opportunities or take advantage of those opportunities, like Mr. Beattie said, because of a severe lack of skilled labor. And we'll continue that way until we're able to get it. I don't know if all of these are new, but I wrote down some quick ones. Certainly technology. So we're looking for efficiencies. So efficiencies through software and equipment. I think we're looking for increased skills in those areas. Green is very popular now. Energy efficiency, environmental friendliness. People are staying in their homes more, they're traveling less. Those are becoming much more important. So skill development there is important. Alternative materials and supplies, education to offset the shortages and replacements. Project management and time management skills with the longer lead times. Again, I mentioned the communication skills. There's less belly-to-belly conversations, as we call them, and much more Zoom and email. And those skills seem to be a lost art. And so reskilling there or upskilling there is important. And finally, and something that is absolutely more in the forefront now is mental health awareness and strategies and fitness in that area.
So Steve, then as we're emerging from our COVID caves, we're emerging into an environment that's been dramatically changed from the one we knew before.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not emerging, we call it nesting, but people really are working from home, learning from home. So their homes are a different space. They're looking at it differently and using it differently. And so that severely impacts our industry for sure.
Dan, what are you finding?
Well, just coming off mute. We're finding that from a technology perspective, the appetite for emerging technologies and new ways of managing people, qualifications, competencies, and ultimately reaching back into our ecosystem of training service providers, it's starting to increase. So seeing this connectivity between the employer, the employee, and ultimately the issuing bodies of certifications is starting to become more and more efficient, but ultimately more needed, just to make sure, as Steve mentioned, when somebody comes back from their nesting environment or comes back into the work environment, they are qualified, certified, and competent to perform those jobs, so they don't put others at risk. So if we're talking specifically in the trades and labor market or high risk profile workforce, that is now becoming more top of mind for employers. Absolutely.
So let's turn then to our educational colleagues. What we've heard from the business panelists is that the demands are very different from what they used to be, and that we're going to have to respond very quickly on this. From your perspective, as the economy reopens, it's clear that skills shortages have become an acute challenge for employers right across sectors in Canada. What skills are you finding are in the highest demand? And are these consistent across workplaces, or do they differ greatly based on sector, occupation, or region? Who'd like to go first on that? Laura Jo, can I volunteer you? Or Claude, I saw your hand.
Sure. Let me take a crack at this. It's interesting because we've seen, and much reference has been made to a K-shaped economy where there are some sectors that have throughout the pandemic and continue to be absolutely red hot, as Steve coined earlier. And there are other sectors that are very much struggling to continue to stay in business. And both have different issues in terms of attracting talent and retaining talent. So not exactly all sectors have the same experience. And our objective is always to understand the needs of the sector or the subsector and be able to respond and tailor the training that they need specifically to meet their need, whether it's entry level or whether it's upskilling and reskilling. So specifically for mid-career workers right now, we're seeing a number of emerging phenomena. And some of those are related to the ability to move between companies. And that creates a whole set of problems for the people inheriting the skill set and the company that's going without. And for us to be able to address that training. So a lot of leadership skills, people who are moving into managerial roles that traditionally not have that kind of training. So the ability to lead people and the skills that go with this. Steve mentioned time and project management, very much in demand. So many complexities right now to the world of work, managing remote teams, managing teams that are hybrid or on-site, and things that are not arriving on time because of supply logistics issues that need to be taken care of, from management of logistics and management of time. So a lot of techniques are being passed on through the curriculum that we develop to help those employers and those employees for those types of skills that are much needed in our current time and in the future as well.
Can I pick up on that, Claude? Because it's clear that it's been disruptive, that we're in a period where there's significant change. Do you see that as short-term, that we're simply responding to short-term problems? Or is it something where there have been permanent structural changes that the institutions are going to have to respond to?
These are going to be permanent with us. They're not going to be short-lived, simply because what we've learned during the pandemic will continue to exist and will continue to accelerate. So speed of change of the industries will continue. Everyone is trying to be more efficient, more competitive, demand more from their workforce, and that is in regard to the introduction of artificial intelligence tool, automation, efficiencies, as was pointed out in the workplace. That will continue to require ongoing skilling. You no longer go to school once or maybe twice in your life and you're set for life. You need to continuously learn new things. But that doesn't mean necessarily coming to school and occupying what we call seat time. There's different ways that we have adjusted to deliver, and whether it's deliver at the employer site, delivery that's partly hybrid or fully online. We've addressed this through flexibility of the way we design what we impart, as well as how we deliver it. And I think that's going to continue to accelerate in response to the changes in industry. So it's here to stay.
Laura Jo, you run one of the most innovative and entrepreneurial institutions in Canada. It's extraordinary what Nate does. Are you having the same experience as Claude is having? How are employers' demands in terms of what they need for skills changing?
So yes, so in Alberta, so we're in Edmonton, so we service a lot of the industrial heartland out here, and so all the pandemic pieces, of course, are having an impact on Alberta as well. And it's, we still, we need tech talent, all the remote learning and everything. On top of that, we have a huge energy transition that is happening, as everybody knows. So we are really looking hard at what that energy transition means and what that's going to mean, particularly the upskilling and reskilling of our mid-career workers. Because as we move to things, for example, like a hydrogen economy, what is that going to mean in terms of upskilling and reskilling workers? Because it's great to say, well, we're going to have large trucks that is going to use hydrogen as part of its fuel base, but who's building those trucks? Who's maintaining those trucks? Right now, if you look at our mechanics, they're not coming through with that kind of designation. So same thing with transportation of hydrogen. The same thing with a lot of the petrochemical plants out here and their dedication to net zero. So we are really experiencing, on top of all of that, that next layer in terms of that absolute energy transition and that move to really redefine probably one of the most major industry sectors here in Alberta. So that has become a huge piece for us.
So each of you have indicated that these are permanent changes. They're dramatic. Things are moving very quickly, and that both business and the educational sector are going to have to adapt. Laura Jo and Claude, can I ask you, what are examples of some of the ways in which you are adapting that are innovative and that are making the institution more responsive and more relevant?
So do you want me to start, Claude? And then
go ahead.
Review. Okay. And I may actually drag Dan into this one. So one of the things that we've been doing from a educational point of view, so this isn't about the content that we're teaching, but rather about the methodology. And we're talking about microcredentials. And for mid-career workers, what we're working on, and we're working on it with partners like Credivera, where we are saying, okay, let's see what experience you already have. And let's micro-credential that so that we can run you through a meaningful assessment so that you don't have to start all over again, nor do you have to go back to school. A bit of what Claude was talking about in terms of meeting people where they are. So you can run people through a meaningful assessment. And we've been looking at all kinds of models, including those that use remote video for instructors to be able to observe somebody doing something, right through to scenarios using artificial intelligence. And then we can give a credential based on the experience they have in that assessment, or we can just give them the training that they need. So this is really, really important, especially when we need to really start to have employment go back up. And one of the areas we didn't talk about is hospitality and tourism, but it is a major, major sector in Canada and here in Alberta. Don't forget, we've got Jasper and Banff and Waterton. I better mention that one too. So it's just, trying to get all that talent reskilled and upskilled in a very short period of time. We're really rethinking the model, and we're using some of the I don't want to say blockchain because I know Dan's going to correct me, but the ledger technology to really help companies be able to record and understand that. So it's a really innovative way that we're progressing.
If I can add as well, there are some examples of applying this at scale. What's difficult to obtain sometimes is accurate and timely labor market information in order to make that assessment of what's needed. And very large companies have the wherewithal to be able to do some of that internally. So really the focus for us is more on small to medium size enterprises that for whom training is not their forte. They may not have the wherewithal in order to be able to do that. And this is what we specialize in. So being able to act as a convener and be able to work with small and medium enterprises to understand their training needs now into the near future in order to put together something that is going to function, work well for them is critical. Even before the pandemic, we were doing these types of roles in order to retool perhaps an industry or a particular employer that is going through a rough patch. We've done that for companies that were on the verge of closing in order to reshape the direction of the company. Prior to the pandemic, we had a small steel and aluminum issue because of tariffs that had increased, as an example, and being able to work with local companies and fabricators in order to assist them. There's a role for government as well in that to also assist. And we've taken advantage of that at Algonquin College in Ontario with the Ministry of Labour Training and Skills Development through a program called Skills Advance Ontario, or SAOs. And Steve has sat on one of those to help inform the content that was ultimately delivered to a number of companies. And so those SAOs were along verticals in specific areas. We've done some for manufacturing, in health, in construction, and in forestry. And those were sectors where there was a need to retool, in some cases, upskill workers. And by working with specific industries like Amstead Design and Build, we're able to obtain the information we needed in order to create the training packages that responds and meets their needs.
Dan and Steve, can we focus for a minute on people who are already our employees? I think that one of the changes in recent years has been that increasingly you can't guarantee that the job that you were hired to fill is going to remain. The most likely guarantee is it's going to change, and you're going to have to see upskilling and education as a lifelong process instead of as a canning process where you flip open the lid in kindergarten and slam it shut after post-secondary. What are some of the challenges for you as business people in terms of meeting this upskilling need with your current employees, and how are you trying to achieve this?
Steve, why don't I let you take that first, and then I'll tackle.
Thanks, Dan. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Excuse the industry terminology there. The lifelong learning is just that, and it's a critical attitudinal change that needs to happen. People that got into different businesses, different industries, years ago thought that they would learn a skill, they'd use that skill through their entire career, and that's no longer the case. They have to have lifelong learning, they have to upskill as they go, and so educating the labor force that is the reality, the new normal. I think that's an important part of it. Claude mentioned small and medium-sized business, and again, we're fragmented and we don't have the resources of large business, but we do represent the vast majority of the labor force. So working with colleges, having business and college, and frankly, government with a leadership role, invest in that future thinking and that lifelong learning and the programs that we can work collaboratively for. The mandate in Ontario for colleges is to basically to produce the labor force of the future. And the only way they can do that is if business is working, again, collaboratively or integratively with the colleges so that they know what we're looking for both today and into the future. So I think making the time, making that investment is huge. And the way that we're doing it is just that we're a small business, but we work closely with Algonquin. We take the advantages that we're provided to work on the sitting committees that Claude mentioned, on the PACs, on the Board of Governors, so that we can get forward the needs that we have and help direct the education that's coming out of the college and into our industry and to the other industries. And we also work with and rely upon government leadership and financial support.
Steve, as you mentioned, you're a small business, which means you don't have all sorts of backup resources. If your employees are reskilling or upskilling, how do you manage this issue of time and being able to continue to run the business at the same time as you have to focus on improving the skill sets of your employees?
And make a profit. Yeah, I was hoping Dan would have to answer that because I don't know the answer, but it's a challenge. It's an investment, I guess, is what it really comes down to, right? It's that you're looking forward, you're seeing the benefit of doing it, the necessity of doing it. We just ran I think we ran 25 people. We're a small company of say 50 people. We ran 25 of them through a 9-day course over a 9-week period. So it's a day a week out of production. And that hits the bottom line heavily, paying them to be in class. But it was a leadership training program. It's what they needed to upskill, and that will pay dividends in the future. So having that forward thinking, I guess, would be my answer.
Dan, what's your perspective?
I'll add two components to the conversation that just took place. So the first one is our job is to accelerate, as technologists, our job is to accelerate exactly what Steve is going through. Steve is a representative of a small, medium business-sized community, but there's thousands of Steve and organizations like Steve, and they cannot all participate simultaneously and have the same voice at the community level. Right, so being able to tell everybody what's my shortage, what's my skill gap, where do I need support in, and so on and so forth. So what we endeavored to do as Credivera and what we came to market originally was ultimately creating a product that allows an open exchange network of information that allows the many businesses to create these profiles of individuals that then can be published back to the post-secondaries and other training associations to say this is a skills matrix of that individual. Because Steve's carpenter might look just a little bit differently than somebody in Northern Alberta versus Southern Saskatchewan, but they still represent the small, medium business community across Canada as a whole. Because we look at this as a Canadian challenge, not just as a provincial, interprovincial challenge. So our job is to create that skill matrix and to expose it back to the post-secondaries in a very timely, almost a near real-time environment where we can now start making decisions as to what do we need to add to our micro-credentialing? So now going back into what the post-secondaries have been doing incredibly well and are going to continue doing really well, which is being able to understand the person's skills, gaps, and commit to supporting that growth of that skill, that gap through micro-credentialing. And lifelong learning is here to stay, absolutely. Anybody ignoring that will have a very bleak outlook here in a very short period of time because there is no way of getting around that. So creating ways in which technology can expose information going back to Laura Jo's point, in a trusted, auditable, transparent format that the post-secondaries and others can now use to create and to maintain that upskilling component is critical. So our job is, how do we create the rails of verification and communication to bring back amongst all from one single trusted source, which is ultimately the individual themselves telling the world what it is that they need. And they're being supported by the company to say, I do agree that you are short-skilled in this. Therefore, wouldn't it be great if Claude or Laura Jo or any other institute could actually give you this upskill? So this is where technology is really going to start taking a play into connecting the world together, from the businesses, the people, and the educational side.
Dan, you mentioned micro-credentialing, and this has come up a couple of times so far in our conversation. Your company, Credivera, focuses on secure, verifiable credentials. When it comes to upskilling and reskilling, how much do credentials actually matter to employers? And from a learner perspective, how can individuals track and store and share their credentials with an employer or a prospective employer? How does this work?
That's a very good question. So we're moving into a world where the individuals own their data, right? We've seen GDPR compliances accentuating that. We've seen California state laws of privacy doing exactly this. And now in Canada, we're seeing the evolution of Bill C-11. And that charter right of data privacy and ownership is really where we're starting to move. So giving the individuals the ability to own what they know, for them to be able to share and revoke that information based on their management of their data is critical. So as we're moving into this world of digital wallets, and we're seeing a lot of education starting to come up of digital identity, digital wallets, portable information, ownership of information. This is where, again, our company focused on this because we come from a space of working in trades and high-risk profile workforce. So for us, this is really as part of our background and backbone of our organization. But what's important is that information has to be able to be presented back to the post-secondary or to the original training organization in such a way in which whether the person takes some micro-credentials or upskilling at NAIT, whether they go to Algonquin College, whether they go to Bow Valley College, regardless of where they travel through their life of continuous upskilling, that is a transferable digital asset that everybody can read, everybody can understand, and can add to it, right? Laura Jo's group should just be able to add to it and not have to worry about, well, mine is written in this language and the other group won't understand it. We're all moving to a global recognized standard of information. And that's then important for the employer because regardless of what HRIS system, health and safety system, learning management system they use, the information can then flow into that technology and they can now keep track and manage that information digitally. So this is where we're moving. And it's incredibly important to allow for these rails of communication to be standardized and managed in a way in which we can all operate off that same single source of truth fundamentally.
I want to remind everybody in the audience that we invite questions from the audience. Please send them in. We'll get to them very, very shortly. Just a couple of questions before we do that. Some of them are coming in already. Dan and Steve, how are your businesses working together? How are you partnering with institutions like Algonquin and NAIT?
I mean, I can speak on our behalf. The way that we're partnering with NAIT is actually we're running these specific use cases directly with NAIT's supplier workforce. So how do we make sure that the individuals that are showing up on a NAIT job site are actually qualified, certified, and competent to perform those jobs? Whether that means working on a boiler unit, whether that means they're constructing a new wing or upgrading a new wing of that of the college. How do you make sure that trades and labored and skilled group is actually coming in doing the right job? So right person for the right job, qualified and certified to do that. So we want to make sure that we present back to NAIT as the employer, in this case, the credentials and accreditations of that individual. And then that also allows NAIT to see their profile and understand, should they have been upskilled or reskilled in something?
Steve, how about you?
Get the mute off there. I think, as I mentioned before, just that collaboration, maybe not being intimidated by the large business that is our college as a small business, and getting over that and really investing and sharing and collaborating, pursuing ways to work together as an industry, not just as our company, maybe individually, but as an industry, and finding those synergies, doing some research as to what the college offers, having the college research what our needs are, sharing those needs, sharing the wants, learning how to work together. We are both upskilling and recruiting through Algonquin. So working with Algonquin to take advantage of the programs they have or create programs that meet our individual needs or industry needs, but also looking at the graduates coming out of Algonquin, how can we participate in their education, whether it's in-class guest speaking or lecturing, and looking at that recruitment side of it. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the program advising, advisory committees, and just having the college and industry really understand each other's needs and just working together, working collaboratively.
Last question from me before we go to the audience questions, and let me direct it to our educational colleagues. It's clear that in planning to meet to overcome the shortages that we're seeing in the workforce today, we need a collaborative process. Today we have business and we have educational institutions coming together. Who else needs to be at the table for us to do this successfully? Claude?
Yeah, I think, as we've said before, I think a key player in that, there's a role for government, whether it's federal, whether it's provincial, depending on the kind of mobility of the workforce we want to have in this country. There's work to be done between jurisdictions. There's work to be done between municipal level and provincial level. I think there's a role for government there to assist. And the players that are here, you know, the educational sector and the industry itself. I think that to me completes the trio that's needed to make this work successfully.
Marjo?
Yeah, so I agree with Claude that government at all levels has a very serious role to play because, you know, making sure that the skilled workforce is there for everybody is important. The other group that is industry, but I think needs to be highlighted, are those people who actually help people get jobs. So the Indeeds of the world, Glassdoor. So the people that are connecting employees with employers or any group like that, because that is a huge, huge market segment. And their pain points right now is that they have employers who say, I can't find any skilled workforce. And we have people who are looking for work or trying to go to a better job if they have work, saying, I'm overqualified. I don't understand why I'm not getting these jobs. So the idea of being able to take those skills and that knowledge that, you know, we want to make more apparent and be able to bridge that gap in terms of the upskilling and reskilling that's needed, they could be really interesting partners at the table because they have the reach and the audience to be able to reach that quickly in terms of their knowledge base and the data that they have. So that would be another one that I would highlight.
Okay. When I realized I said that was the last question from me, I lied. One more to our educators that I can't resist, and that is the question of filling these gaps and being able to predict what the needs are going to be in the future. We've been notoriously bad over the course of decades in terms of being able to predict what future skills needs are going to be because technology and the economy change so dramatically. And we in business expect that you're going to produce for us exactly the people we need when we need it. And it's a matter of turning the faucet and you're going to be there.
Yeah.
But in fact, it takes years of planning to be able to bring people on stream. All of us would concede that none of us predicted where we would be today just 2 years ago.
Right.
What reason do we have to believe it'll be different this time?
It's a $1 million question, Aaron. It's what we can do is help learners future-proof themselves, if I can use that term, is give them skills that are transferable, that have portability to them. Having the ability to learn to unlearn and relearn. I think those are all, I won't just call them survival skills, but they're so important for them to be able to jump from one sector to another in some cases.
So the soft skills.
So, yes, but also some technical skills as well. There are many. To give you an example, for instance, you know, there are some skills that are in the hospitality industry that may be portable to the health sector, as an example. So even though they're separate, we treat them as separate verticals. There are areas of intersection between some that, and people don't often see that. And it's important for us to be able to shine a light on that and show them that, you know, the gap is not as big as you think it is. So that's one piece I think that, you know, will continue to play itself out, that we can have a role in helping with. But I think the $1 million question is always, how do you teach to jobs that don't exist right now? We've seen this movie before where we were talking about advancing artificial intelligence before it came to be, and how do you prepare people for a world that's highly automated? So I think some of the things I described here can be of assistance because out of the box, the programs that we tend to offer at scale tend to be things that are right now in effect for the majority of employers. Where micro-credentials play a role is where we can do those quick tests, those market tests, we call them. Do something at smaller scale where we can rapidly pivot. This is where we can introduce new technologies, new techniques, something that is just emerging, where we don't lose our shirt in creating an entire program and betting wrong on something. So by having these smaller experiments, smaller courses, this is where you can test new notions for new academic products and then grow them if the idea takes off.
Laura Jo, do you have a crystal ball at Nate? Are you confident that the skills you're providing to people are the ones that are going to be in demand in the future?
Oh yeah, Alberta knows everything. No, I'm just. No, I agree with what Claude has said. The one thing we do know is that there are some, in addition to what Claude has said, and I think that some of the work that Dan's doing in terms of being able to keep your credentials with you and keeping them up to date, and that home micro-credential piece so that we're building that block by block is really important. Not only does it help people reskill faster, but it also saves on retraining costs for the employer as well, right? It brings those costs down. The other is that we know that there are things that we are really going to have to start to pay a whole lot of attention to, right? We're talking about net zero. We're talking about greening the economy. This is not something that is going to go away. So as we move towards that and make those commitments, I think on some of those larger scale pieces, we're going to have a little bit more, and I hate to use the word certainty in this time because there's no certainty, but we're feeling a little more comfortable that these are the skills that we can upskill with. Because the one thing about upskilling and reskilling, all your previous information doesn't go away, right? You build on it. And at some point, it always comes back to help you. So I agree with what Claude has said as well, that those little micro-credentials are going to be really important.
Great. Let's go to the questions from the audience. We have a number here, and let's see if we can just bang through them as quickly as possible. As a panel, who's responsible for the training of employees? And can I add to that, what barriers are there to employing high schoolers in the construction industry? Steve, it sounds like that second one was definitely directed at you.
Yeah, so are there barriers for high school? Really, no. There's some safety training, obviously, that's required. So some baseline training that is available either through the industry or through the unions or through the college. So very easily gotten. Obviously, we're looking at the co-op programs that are out there. At Amstead, hopefully no one gets cross with me here, but when you're talking about the responsibility for training, we say that it's the individual's responsibility. It's not the company's responsibility. It's not the industry's responsibility. It's the individual's responsibility. It's the company's responsibility to facilitate and support them. But really, we want our team to be their own little enterprise, entrepreneurial, and really be responsible for their education, for their upskilling. And then our job is to support them.
I'm seeing heads nodding there. Is everybody in agreement that it's the individual who has that responsibility?
I think it's important to have guidance from your employer as to the what and the how and what's the matrix for. But it ultimately is up to you as an individual to maintain and that for sure. Finding out where to source it from, I think, is also important to understand because it is one thing to know that you have to take it, but being guided to where you should take it from is also important. There are certain employers that we find in our industry, and we work with small construction companies through to some of the largest across North America. And sometimes they have mandated skills that are in courses that are taken only from specific providers. Right, so you got to be very careful in that respect as well. So being guided to the right group is also an important component.
There's another part to that question as well. The questioner asked, what industries are more welcoming to the younger workforce? Do some stand out as being more obvious targets for younger people to be looking at?
And I might jump in there really quickly. Just rethinking the first question that you had about restrictions to get into our industry. We have open arms for everyone. We're encouraging, minorities, women, everybody to come into the industry. Some people think that the barriers to coming in, and I don't think it's just our industry, might be physical barriers, that there's heavy lifting and inclement weather and all of those things. And that's just certainly not the case anymore. So there are really absolutely no barriers. And I would suggest that if there is any industry that is not welcoming everyone with open arms right now, that they're going to be in trouble. I think if you asked, I represent the construction industry, so I think everyone has barriers. It's only the construction industry that doesn't come to our industry. If someone else was sitting on the panel, I think that they would argue the same thing.
You're a great recruiter, Steve. Well done. Next question from the audience, and it's a very timely one. Immigrants come with all sorts of skills. How are these being integrated? How are they being integrated in these changes when their credentials are not easily recognized in Canada? My impression is we're doing a better job of credential recognition than we used to do in the past, but is it good enough?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in really quickly on this, then I'll pass it back to our partners on the institution side. So we've obviously seen a lot of changes with the Ministry of Labour, allowing for recognition of certifications and qualifications. This is exactly where Laura Jo and Mishak, our other partner this morning, on a panel we were discussing, which is this transferability and portability of a credential that everybody can recognize regardless where you are, because it's built in such a way in which it's issued in such a way in which it's recognized by all. So I think that becomes incredibly important. What's interesting is how do you manage the competency, equivalency of that credential? And that's the part that I don't think we discuss enough about. So if somebody comes over to Alberta or to Ontario and wants to jump into that position that they had into their prior ecosystem back home, how do you ensure that the Canadian competency level is met? And I think that's an important component where the post-secondary is going to play a critical role, because they have a few things that are really important to us. One, it's a trusted brand and identity. And two, it's the name and the years of experience of being the ones that can put a stamp and say, I approve that this person's competency level is what it needs to be to join Steve's organization confidently.
Dan, that's fascinating. When we have the difficulty, even when you move from province to province, that people often have to be re-credentialed, how do you deal with it if somebody is coming from Zambia or Hungary and measure the competency? Can we overcome it?
And I think that's where, Laura Jo, would love to turn over to you quickly because of the work that we just talked about this morning. And Claude, I know that you have some great insights to top that.
Do you want to go first? So I'm ready to jump in. Maybe I'll jump in right now. So yes, this is important. More work needs to be done in that area. Certainly what we're trying to do is teach to the gap. And that was explained before, where let's measure what you already know and can. We don't have to do that again. So for example, math is math, irrespective of where you learned it. Let's do away with that. We're not going to spend time on this, but take an example, Steve, construction sector, Canadian Building Code. Likely you did not study this if you were from another continent. So how do we then, teach to the gap? It's okay, we'll teach you the Canadian Code. You need that in order to function in our Canadian construction industry, and focus on those aspects, and then provide a credential. And the way to do this is to do the upfront assessment, and then do the delivery that's needed, and then provide whatever other pieces are needed. An important piece would be the linkages to perhaps the industry that they may not be familiar with, having mentors, being able to be linked to the employers. So that's an important piece as well, to ensure that our immigrant population are well integrated within the fabric. Another role also is for associations or regulators, if I can use that term. So sometimes it's not the colleges, the polytechnics themselves, who need to provide the right competencies and teach to the outcomes of the programs or the short credential. It's also the body that will accredit them externally if they're part of an accredited occupation. They have a role to play as well. Make sure that they also understand the needs and aspirations of immigrants and can respond to them as well.
Laura Jo, you agree?
I agree. The only thing I'll throw in there, because Claude did a superb answer, is that we also could have a role to play in helping with the Canadian business or professional culture into which they are coming. So in terms of things like our equity, diversity, and inclusion lenses and all of that. So I think there's a role for us to play on that side as well.
Another very interesting question here. As it regards upskilling and reskilling, many of the emerging jobs require technical skills with experience and not just knowledge acquisition online or in a classroom. How will new upskilling or reskilling models account for these needs?
Are you talking about people coming in and using a lab?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Are you talking about people coming in and needing to use a lab, like to demonstrate the skills or work? Like,
I think what it's talking about is it may be on-the-job experience that people may need, as opposed to something that can be given in a classroom or online.
So out here in Alberta, we're starting to look at some of that. So our apprenticeship programs are they're very concentrated on about 30 trades. And we are now embarking on some prototypes around apprenticeship-like programming, where you spend 51% of your time at an employer. And just like apprenticeship, we're looking at things that can almost digitize the Blue Book. And the Blue Book is really the way that you keep track of the skills that you've learned and the hours that you've done on that task. And if we can actually start to think about it on those terms, in terms of helping guide that learning on the job, that could then lead to a credential that's just outside of what is your job experience and maybe shows up on your employment record, that could be very powerful in terms of being able to transfer those skills or have more of a credential recognition. Mm-hmm. So that's one option.
Yeah, it's a must nowadays. All of our programs of study have what we call a work integrated learning component or an experiential component, whether it's co-op, field placement, unpaid internship. It's critical for the student, the learner, to have spent time in a workplace with an employer in order to understand how to apply what they've learned in school. And so that marriage, the amount of time needed will vary between occupation, but it's critical. It's a way for the learners to understand more fundamentally the work they're going to be doing for a living, and for the employer to also recognize the kind of skills that are coming out from the institution.
Another really intriguing question here from the audience. In light of the ongoing affordability crisis, what's the proposed cost-sharing model for this lifetime learning approach for talent in the workforce? Is the government creating incentives through grants and tax credits, businesses through skills and development programs, or the talent from their personal income? Or who has to bear the greatest share of the cost here? What are your thoughts on that?
I'd like to jump in quickly on that. So if an organization today does not have, my opinion, if they don't have a upskilling budget for an individual, that is something that the workforce is looking for. Like it's table stakes at this point in time, having that as part of your hiring model. Now, knowing how much a course can cost or should cost is going to be important. And I do believe that as the government, if we do decide that we want to maintain this workforce, it is going to be very important to support the small, medium businesses to actually allow for this to take place and to be affordable. What is the definition of affordable? I think it's different province by province, sector by sector. But I do think it's an important milestone that we have to take into account because as Claude mentioned, we're moving at such a fast pace from technology, from the assets we work on, from what we need to know on a daily basis, that you can't be left behind, because that 830,000 number we talked about at the beginning will do nothing but grow, and it will put us all in that new gig economy workforce concentration, which means that there will not be a I'm going to work with this employer for as long as I can. It'll be I will go to the next person that will support my my growth and my personal opportunity.
Thanks, Dan. We have a number of great questions here, and unfortunately, we've run out of time, and that we're committed to closing off by the top of the hour. Can I simply thank each of you for your participation today? This is a discussion that could have gone on, well, that will go on for much, much longer. It'll go on for years, not just minutes. But each of you has brought an important perspective. And what's exciting for me is to see the degree of engagement that each of you show and the innovation that both in the private sector side and the part of the post-secondary institutions you've demonstrated. So thank you, each of you, both for being with us today and for all that you and your institutions continue to do to meet the needs of Canada and our skills needs for the future. With that, let me turn it over to Wise.
Thank you, Perrin. And I'd like to echo your expressions of gratitude to all our panelists. Thank you all, Steve, Claude, Lauren, Dan. It's been an excellent panel, an excellent discussion, and it certainly could have gone a lot longer because there's so much to talk about. And it's clear from this dialogue that both industry and educational institutions are indeed collaborating and innovating so that everyone in our country has an opportunity to contribute to our recovering economy in accordance with their passions and talents. So thank you again. And I'd like to thank our event sponsor today, Polytechnics Canada. Not only is Polytechnics a key player in strengthening Canada's labor market, but their contribution today made this event possible. So thank you again. And finally, I'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. Like Perrin mentioned at the outset of this program, a great advantage of a virtual format is that you can convene people from all across the country. And so we thank you for joining us. However, we do miss you. We miss seeing you in person. We miss breaking bread and meeting and connecting face-to-face during the course of an event. And on that note, I'd like to announce that we are having our first in-person event at the Canadian Club of Ottawa next week, Monday, May 2nd, 2022. And so I'd like to invite you all to join us in person at the Rideau Club for what will be a very riveting discussion on the upcoming Ontario election. The title of the event is "What Will It Take to Win in Ontario?" We have none other than Nick Nanos moderating this discussion, and it'll be a very interesting panel with both former Deputy Premier Deb Matthews, Conservative strategist Chris Froggatt, and Senior strategist Kathleen Monk. Please visit our website for a ticket or to reserve your seat. You can reserve your seat at CanadianClubOttawa.ca. If you'd like to reserve a table, please contact us as soon as possible and we can make arrangements for that. Thank you again for joining, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.